Welcome to Firefighter Hero Stories. Subscribe now for incredible tales of courage and heroism from the world of firefighting. Don't miss out. It was one of those mornings that felt like nothing special. The sky was barely lit by the sun as I rolled out of bed. My alarm went off at 6:30 am, the same time it always does. But today, for some reason, I felt like I could have just rolled over and gone back to sleep. But I didn't. I couldn't. That's not how we do things in this job. I stretched, hearing the familiar pop in my shoulders, then shuffled to the bathroom to wash up. I looked at myself in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, the usual tired look. But there was something else today, a feeling I couldn't shake. Something was off. It wasn't a bad feeling, just different. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the heat. It was going to be another scorching summer day in New Jersey. The kind of day that makes you feel like you're walking through a sauna. Or maybe it was just the weight of the uniform, but something told me today wasn't going to be like the others. I pulled on my gear. The thick jacket, the helmet, everything that makes you feel like you're ready for war. But even with all that protection, there's always a little voice in your head that wonders if you're really ready for what's about to happen. It's a weird job, firefighting. People think it's all about rushing in to put out fires, saving the day, you know. But it's more about the people you save, or the ones you can't. The firehouse was only a couple of blocks away. I grabbed my coffee on the way out, black, no sugar, and walked over to the station. When I walked through the door, the guys were already there. John, Maria, Mike, and the rest of the crew. The usual crowd. John was already sitting at the table, his coffee in hand. He's been around for over 20 years. The guy doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen. He's seen it all. Smoke inhalation has taken a toll on his voice. It's raspy, like someone dragged sandpaper across it every day for years. "Morning, Tom," he said, looking up from his coffee. He didn't need to say more. We both knew what the other was thinking. The quiet days, the ones where you just hang around waiting for the call, they never last long. "Morning," I replied, nodding at him. I poured myself a cup of coffee, strong black. Maria was at the stove, frying up some eggs. She's the only woman on our crew, and she can hold her own. Doesn't matter if you're a 250-pound guy or someone half her size. If you screw up, she'll call you out on it. That's why I respect her. "Another easy day, I bet," she said, giving me a teasing grin. Maria has this way of making everything sound like a joke, even though we all know she's serious when it counts. I shrugged. You know how it goes. Calm before the storm. Mike, our rookie, was sitting at the table fiddling with his gear. He's been with us for 6 months, and you can still see the nerves in his face sometimes. He's good though, smart, wants to prove himself. But everyone has that first fire, the one that hits you hard and teaches you more than anything you could ever learn in training. "Everything quiet so far?" I asked, trying to ease him into the conversation. "Yeah, it's been real slow," he said, not looking up from his boots. "I guess that's a good thing, right?" I nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. It was his first year, and I knew he was waiting for that first big call, the one that makes you realize exactly what kind of job you signed up for. It's always a little unnerving when the first big one comes, and no matter how much training you've had, nothing really prepares you for the real thing. Just then, the radio crackled to life. We all froze. Engine 3, we've got a fire at 45th and Oak. Multiple reports of people trapped. Requesting immediate backup, over." I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't a false alarm. This wasn't a car fire or a dumpster fire. People were trapped, and that meant it was real. I didn't hesitate. The adrenaline kicked in immediately. "All right, guys, we've got work to do," I said, standing up and grabbing my helmet. The others moved in sync with me, all of us heading straight for the gear. There was no time for goodbyes, no time to second-guess anything. We were already running to the trucks. Mike was at the back of the crew, fumbling with his gloves. I clapped him on the back as I ran past him. "You ready for this?" I asked. He looked up at me, eyes wide, but he nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready," he said, though his voice had a little tremor in it. It was okay. I remember my first big fire. You can't just turn off that fear. It's what keeps you sharp. We piled into the truck. The engine roared to life, and before I knew it, we were flying down the streets, sirens blaring, lights flashing. The sound of the truck's sirens blended with the sound of my own heartbeat as we sped through the city, the heat from the morning sun already starting to push against the truck's metal walls. As we neared the intersection of 45th and Oak, I could see the smoke rising in the distance, thick and black. The closer we got, the more I could feel the weight of the situation. It wasn't just any fire. This was going to be serious. We turned the corner and saw the house. A 2-story building, flames already licking at the roof. The smoke was dense and the fire was aggressive, moving quickly. I could see people standing outside watching, but no one seemed to be moving. That meant they were waiting for us. I climbed out of the truck as fast as I could, my boots hitting the ground with a thud. The heat from the fire was intense, even from the street, and the air was thick with the smell of burning wood and plastic. It wasn't like anything you can ever prepare for in a training session. "Let's go," I shouted, and everyone was already moving. John and Maria split off to the back of the house to try and ventilate, while Mike and I headed to the front. I took a deep breath, the smoke filling my lungs. It burned, but there was no time to worry about it. There were people inside, and we were the only ones who could get them out. As we sprinted toward the house, I could hear the fire roaring, crackling in the walls, the heat radiating off the structure. My heart was already racing, but there was no room for nerves, not anymore. In a few seconds, you're either in control or out of control, and I wasn't about to let it be the second option. "Mike, you're on the nozzle. I'll handle the rest," I called out to him as I grabbed the hose. It was heavy, but not as heavy as the weight of what we were about to do. Mike nodded, pulling the nozzle tight in his hands. We approached the front door, which was barely visible through the smoke. I could feel the heat through my gloves. The door itself was almost too hot to touch. The frame around it was glowing with heat like a furnace. "Ready," I shouted over the roar of the fire. Mike didn't answer with words, but I saw the fire in his eyes. The determination, the will to prove himself. He wasn't about to back down. I nodded at him, giving the signal, and we pushed through the door. The sound of the flames swallowing the house whole was deafening. The air inside was thick and choked with black smoke. It was the kind of smoke that stings your eyes and makes your lungs feel like they're on fire with every breath. But that's part of the job. You get used to it, or you don't. The temperature inside felt like it was rising by the second. Sweat was already pouring down my face, making my skin feel slick beneath my gear. Every breath was labored, the smoke making it harder to inhale. But you keep pushing forward. We had to get inside, had to find those people. "Mike, keep your head on a swivel. We don't know where they are," I said, making sure he was alert. He followed close behind me, his eyes scanning through the smoke. We moved slowly, inching our way through the living room. I could hear the fire crackling above us, the ceiling groaning under the strain of the flames. There was a distant, high-pitched sound, maybe a piece of furniture breaking or part of the structure giving way. It was unsettling, but you can't let it get to you. Focus. That's all that matters now. We passed the kitchen, the air growing even hotter. I could feel the flames creeping toward us, like they were trying to swallow us whole. It wasn't like the fires you see on TV, all slow and controlled. This was real. This was dangerous. "People are trapped. I can feel it," I muttered, more to myself than to Mike. It was like a gut feeling, something you develop after years on the job. When you're in a situation like this, you don't always need to see the victims. You just know they're there. We continued moving through the hallway. The fire was pushing harder now, and the smoke was so thick that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. I glanced back at Mike. His eyes were wide with fear, but his grip on the hose was tight. He was doing exactly what I told him. He was learning fast. Then, suddenly, I heard it, a faint cry. At first, I thought it was the fire itself, a strange crack or a gust of wind. But then it came again. A child's cry. My heart leaped in my chest. "Mike, over here," I shouted, pulling him toward the sound. We moved toward the living room, and I saw the boy. He was no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing frozen in the center of the room. His face was covered in soot, his clothes sinned and torn, but he wasn't panicking. He was calm, too calm. And then I saw what he was holding. 3 tiny puppies curled up in his arms, trembling. I called out, "You need to get out of here, right now." But the boy didn't move. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear in them, only a kind of intense focus. "I can't leave them," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was firm. "I won't." I stopped in my tracks. For a second I couldn't move. There was a fire burning down this house, and this kid, this tiny, brave kid, was standing in the middle of it, clutching 3 puppies, refusing to leave. I shook my head. I've seen some things in this job, things that make you question the world, but this was different. "Listen to me," I said, my voice urgent but soft. "We don't have much time. This whole place is coming down. We can get you and the dogs out, but we have to go now." The boy just stood there, staring at me. His grip tightened around the puppies. "No, I'm not leaving them," he repeated, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. "I promised I'd protect them." I don't know why, but I understood. Maybe it was because I've seen people fight to the end to save what they love. Or maybe it was the way he held those puppies like they were the only thing that mattered in the world. But in that moment, I knew I wasn't leaving without them. I turned to Mike. "Get the hose outside. I'll get the kid." Mike hesitated for just a second, his face conflicted. But I gave him a quick nod and he bolted for the door. I walked toward the boy, my boots heavy on the burning floorboards. The room was growing hotter, the smoke thicker, but the boy didn't seem to notice. He was staring at me, his eyes full of that strange, steady calm. "Kid, listen to me," I said, dropping to one knee so I was eye level with him. "You don't have to protect them alone. I'm going to help you, okay? I promise we're getting out of here, but you have to trust me." For a moment, there was silence. The fire crackled louder, the walls groaning under the pressure of the flames. But the boy didn't move. He was still, holding the puppies so close to his chest that I thought he might suffocate them in his grip. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Okay, I trust you." I didn't waste another second. I gently reached out, taking one of the puppies from his arms and shoving it into my jacket. "Give me the others," I said. He hesitated but then handed me the second and third puppies. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed his hand with my other arm and pulled him to his feet. "Let's go, kid." The house was about to collapse on us, the fire too close for comfort. But we weren't out of the woods yet. I had to get him to safety. I just had to keep moving. I could hear the crash of the ceiling behind us as we sprinted for the door, flames now spilling out of the walls. But we made it. Just as I turned the corner, the roof caved in with a deafening roar. We were out. The boy was safe. The puppies were safe. And for that, I could breathe again. We made it out of the house, but not a moment too soon. The heat behind us was overwhelming, almost unbearable, and when I turned around, I could see the flames reaching toward the sky, threatening to devour everything in their path. But at least we were safe. At least the boy was safe and the puppies. Well, they were safe too. That's all that mattered. I glanced at the boy in my arms. He was still holding the third puppy tightly, his knuckles white from the grip, but his face, it was calm. Too calm for someone who just walked out of a burning house. "You're okay," I said, trying to reassure him. But the truth is, I wasn't entirely sure I was okay. You get used to the chaos, the sirens, the blood, the smoke, but sometimes it hits you. And I felt it now. The weight of what had just happened. "Thank you," the boy whispered, looking up at me with big, grateful eyes. "I knew you'd come." I just nodded, not really knowing what to say. The adrenaline was still surging through me, but the relief, the real relief, hadn't hit yet. There were too many things that could still go wrong. Too many unknowns. Just then, I heard Mike's voice, breathless, calling out to me from the front yard. "Tom, you okay?" "Yeah, we're good," I called back, waving him over. He was panting, his face flushed from the heat of the fire, but when he saw the boy and the puppies, he froze for a second. I could see the shock in his eyes. This wasn't what we were trained for. This wasn't a typical rescue. "Eyes everyone out?" Mike asked, still catching his breath. I looked back at the house. The flames were beginning to spread to the second floor. I knew there were still people in there, but we couldn't go back in, not with the building coming down. It was a hard truth, but one that every firefighter knows. We can't save everyone. We got the kid and the dogs out. I said, my voice a little hoarse. There might still be others inside, but the structure's too unstable. We can't go in. Mike just nodded, his face set in that familiar mix of frustration and helplessness. We'd both been there before. Sometimes, no matter how much you want to save people, you're limited by the situation. There's a line, and it's a fine one, between what you can do and what you can't. I looked down at the boy again. He was still staring at me, clutching the puppies like they were the only thing left in the world. The dogs were trembling, their little bodies shaking from the heat and fear, but the boy wasn't crying. He wasn't even making a sound, just that same calm look on his face. "We need to get him checked out," Maria called out as she walked toward us, John right behind her. "Kid, how are you feeling?" "I'm fine," the boy said quietly, still holding the puppies tightly to his chest. "They're okay too. Thank you for saving them." Maria crouched down to his level, her voice soft but firm. "We need to make sure you're okay, all right? Just a quick check-up, nothing too bad. We don't want any surprises later." The boy nodded, though I could tell he wasn't exactly thrilled about being checked over. His focus was still entirely on those puppies. They were his whole world right now. As Maria and John took the boy over to the ambulance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I'd seen people who'd been through worse. People who had survived crashes, explosions, even explosions, but the way this boy had stood in the middle of a burning house, refusing to leave those puppies behind, it stuck with me. It had an effect on me. The fire was starting to get under control, but we weren't done yet. We still had to do the search and rescue. The building was still burning, and even though we had our team here, there was always a chance someone could be trapped. So we split up. John and Maria went back inside to check the structure from the other side. Mike and I stood by the truck, making sure we were ready for whatever came next. "You think we'll find anyone else in there?" Mike asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. He was still processing everything that had happened. I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't something you just brush off. I looked back at the burning house, the smoke billowing like an angry cloud. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I hope not. But you never know. We'll do what we can." Mike nodded and fell silent. He was still learning the ropes, his first real fire, his first real life or death situation, and I could see he was wrestling with it. I remembered that feeling, the one that sticks in your chest and makes your stomach twist. It's that uncertainty, that fear of not knowing if you're doing enough, if you're doing everything you can. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching longer than the last. The fire was finally under control, but it didn't feel like a win. Not yet. We had to wait for the signal from John and Maria. The building was dangerous, unstable. There was no way we were going to push it further without backup. Mike and I just stood there, staring at the remnants of the house, now little more than a skeleton of its former self. The smoke still poured out, the smell of burning wood and plastic thick in the air. Finally, the radio crackled to life. "Engine 3. Engine 3, this is dispatch. You're clear for search and rescue, over." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We were clear to go in. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The house was unstable, and I wasn't sure what we'd find inside. It was a race against time. I looked over at Mike. "Let's move." Mike and I moved toward the back of the house. The fire had calmed down some, but the smell of burning wood and the crackling of flames still hung in the air. It felt like the whole structure was groaning under the heat, like it was ready to give up at any moment. But we didn't have the luxury of waiting for it to collapse. There were still people inside, and as long as we had a chance to save them, we were going in. The radio crackled again, this time from Maria. "We're in. The second floor's collapsing fast. We need to move." I nodded at Mike, signaling for him to follow me. We had our hoses, our breathing masks, our tools, everything we needed. But nothing could prepare us for what we were about to face inside. We passed the spot where the boy had been, and I couldn't help but glance at the spot where I'd first seen him standing, holding the puppies like they were the last thing that mattered. I thought about what he said, the way he wouldn't leave those dogs. There was something about that moment that kept sticking in my mind, a memory that felt more vivid than anything else in that house. "Focus, Tom," I muttered to myself. I had to push that thought out. There were other people to save. I couldn't get distracted. We reached the front door. It was still smoking, the heat from the fire radiating off it like a wall of heat. The wood was warped, and I could feel it sagging as we pushed it open. The house groaned again like it was ready to fall in on us, but we didn't have a choice. We had to keep going. Mike's voice broke the silence. "Tom, you sure we should be going in like this? The building doesn't look stable." I didn't answer right away. His voice was full of doubt, and I couldn't blame him. This wasn't just a fire, it was a ticking time bomb. But we didn't have time to wait for a safer opportunity. "We have to move. We're the only ones left who can help," I said, my voice steady even though my mind was racing. "The second we stop, we risk losing people." "You ready?" Mike gave me a quick nod. His hands tightened on the hose and his jaw was set. I could see the resolve in his eyes now, the fear replaced by determination. I knew what he was thinking. He was ready for this. We pushed into the house, and the heat hit us immediately. The air was thick with smoke, and the crackle of the fire was like an ever-present reminder that we were in a race against time. The walls were charred, blackened, and the ceiling had already started to collapse in places, chunks of drywall and beams falling to the floor like a ticking clock. "Stay low. Watch your step," I instructed, my voice muffled through my mask. Mike nodded and dropped to one knee, keeping his head down. We moved slowly, methodically, but every step felt like an eternity. The fire was relentless, crawling through the building, seeking out anything that could burn. The whole house seemed to be alive with it, the flames eating their way through walls, devouring anything in their path. As we moved deeper into the house, I heard the faintest sound, a cry, a human cry. It wasn't a scream of terror, but a soft, panicked sob, the sound of someone trapped, someone who hadn't been able to escape. I looked at Mike, and he caught my eye. We both knew what it meant. Someone was still inside. "Down this hall," I said, pointing toward a narrow hallway ahead. The sound was coming from there, muffled but unmistakable. We moved forward, the floor creaking beneath our feet with every step, the flames dancing overhead. We reached the doorway and stopped. The smoke was so thick in here that we could barely see. But I could hear them now, the soft sobs, the rustling of movement. Someone was huddled inside, too scared to come out. I took a deep breath, the air thick and burning in my lungs, and I pushed the door open. Inside, a woman was crouched in the corner, her face streaked with soot, her clothes torn and singed. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was holding a baby wrapped tightly in a blanket, both of them trembling. She looked up at us, her eyes full of terror. "We need to go now," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "We're here to help you. You have to trust me." The woman's eyes darted from me to the fire, then back to her child. I could see the panic in her face. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to leave this small space where she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could stay safe. But the house was coming down around us. "Please, we can't stay here," I repeated, my voice low, steady. "The fire is spreading. You need to move." She hesitated for a moment longer. But then, finally, she stood. Her knees were shaky, and she clutched the baby to her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes still scanning the room, afraid to trust it. I stepped toward her, offering my arm to help her. "Come on, let's get out of here." As we turned to leave, I heard a loud crack from behind us. The ceiling in the room we had just left gave way, a massive chunk of burning wood falling right where we had been standing. My heart skipped a beat. If we'd been a few seconds later, we might not have made it out. We rushed down the hallway, and I heard Mike's voice over the radio. "Tom, you guys clear yet?" "Almost," I said, looking back at the woman. "We've got one more to get out." "Hold on." We pushed through the smoke, keeping the woman close. The flames were getting closer now, and I could feel the heat intensifying with every step. We were almost at the front door when I saw something. Another person, lying motionless on the ground. I rushed over to them, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a man, his face bruised and bloodied, barely conscious. He looked like he had been knocked out, possibly during the chaos of the fire's spread. "Mike, we've got another one. Get over here," I shouted. Mike came running, his face a mask of focus as he reached us. Together, we pulled the man to his feet, supporting him as best we could. The heat was unbearable now. The fire was only moments from fully engulfing the house, and we had to get out before it swallowed us whole. We moved faster, pushing the man and the woman toward the front door, where the rest of the crew was waiting. "Help them," I shouted as we got outside, finally into the fresh air. The flames roared behind us, but for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. The woman collapsed into the arms of Maria, who immediately started checking her over. The man was placed on a stretcher by John. Mike and I stood there for a moment, our chests heaving, our breath coming in ragged gasps. We'd done it. We had saved them. But I couldn't shake the image of the boy standing with those puppies in his arms, his face full of calm determination. I wasn't sure I'd ever forget that. The fire was still burning, but at least we had done our part. At least for today we had made a difference. The fire was finally under control. The crackling sound of the flames had died down to a low roar, replaced by the whine of fire trucks and the hum of equipment being packed away. But even as the smoke began to clear, the weight of the day still pressed down on me. I stood by the truck, taking off my helmet and wiping the sweat from my brow. It felt like my whole body was vibrating from the adrenaline. My muscles were sore, my hands shaking slightly from the intensity of everything that had just happened. But there was also a kind of calm in the air now, a quiet that hadn't been there before. The immediate danger was over. The people we could save were safe. But what about the others, the ones still inside? I tried not to think about it. There was no point. You do everything you can, and sometimes, despite everything, it's not enough. That's the hard truth of this job. But still, something lingered in the back of my mind. Something about today felt different, and it all came back to the boy. I walked over to the ambulance where the woman and her child had been taken. She was being looked at by one of the paramedics, but the boy wasn't with her. I glanced around, my gaze scanning the yard, searching for that familiar face. "Hey, you seen the kid?" I asked Maria as she walked past. Maria looked over at me, her brow furrowed. "The boy with the puppies." "Yeah, he's over there with the paramedics. He's fine. Just a little shaken up, but he's not injured." I sighed in relief. At least he was okay. But as I made my way over to him, I couldn't help but feel something like an unease stirring in my chest. The fire had been chaotic. The heat, the smoke, the screams, the silence after the chaos. But the boy, he had been different. The way he held on to those puppies like they were the only thing that mattered in the world. I still couldn't get the image out of my head. The paramedics were finishing up with him when I approached, and they stepped aside as I knelt down beside him. He was sitting on the back of the ambulance, his legs swinging back and forth, eyes fixed on the ground. The puppies were nestled in a blanket beside him, their little bodies still trembling but clearly safe now. "Hey, kid," I said gently. "You doing all right?" The boy didn't look up at first, but after a long moment he nodded, slowly. "I'm okay. Just a little tired." "Yeah, I get that," I said with a soft chuckle. I looked at the puppies, then back at him. Toe's little guys looked like they're ready for a nap. He smiled faintly, the first time I had seen any kind of emotion from him since we pulled him out of the house. "I promised I'd take care of them," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave them. They're my responsibility." I nodded, understanding more than he probably knew. "I get it," I said, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. "When you've got someone depending on you, you don't give up on them." His gaze lifted then, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something like pride. "They're my family." I nodded again. I didn't know the full story of what had happened, or why the boy had been in that house alone with those puppies, but right now none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was safe, and so were the puppies. "I'm glad we were able to help," I said. "You did good, kid. You stayed calm. A lot of people would have panicked, but you didn't." He shifted uncomfortably, then his face growing serious. What about my house?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Is it gone?" I hesitated, knowing the truth might be hard for him to hear. "The house is gone. It burned down. But you know what? You're alive, and you're going to be okay." His face fell, and for a second I thought he might break down. But instead he looked down at the puppies, their little tails still wagging despite everything they'd just been through. "I didn't care about the house," he said after a long pause, his voice quiet but firm. "I just wanted them to be okay." I looked at him again, and for the first time, I saw the weight of what he'd been carrying. He wasn't just a kid worried about losing his home. He was a kid who'd felt a deep, unwavering responsibility for those puppies, for their safety, for their lives. I couldn't help but respect that. Most kids wouldn't have risked so much to save an animal, let alone 3. "Yeah," I said softly. "I get that, I really do." We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the fire trucks and paramedics in the background, but somehow distant now. It was quiet, peaceful even. The world had moved on, and I could feel it, the shift from chaos to calm. "You're going to be okay," I said again, breaking the silence. "And the puppies, they'll be fine too. You kept them safe, and that's all anyone could ask for." The boy finally looked up at me then, his eyes steady. "I promised I would," he said, as if the words were a kind of affirmation to himself. "Good," I said, standing up. "You keep that promise." I gave him a quick nod before I turned to head back toward the rest of the crew. I couldn't stay too long. There was always more work to do, more people to help, but as I walked away, I glanced back once. The boy was still sitting there, the puppies now asleep in his lap, his gaze fixed on them like they were the only thing that mattered. In that moment, I realized that sometimes the smallest acts, like saving a life or keeping a promise, could mean the world to someone, and sometimes it's the strength of a child's love for something as simple as a puppy that reminds you why you do what you do. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. The fire had burned through the house, but it hadn't burned through the spirit of those who were willing to fight for what they cared about. It wasn't the house or the fire, or even the heat that mattered anymore. It was the lives saved, the promises kept, the people, and the puppies who got another chance. And for me, that was enough.